Welcome back. This is Reggie speaking about healing America's narratives. We're still navigating Chapter 6, which is a brief history and overview of the Vietnam War. I'd like to begin with a brief quote from Neil Sheehan's A Bright Shining Lie, Pulitzer Prize-winning book of journalism written by Sheehan over the course of about 19 years. He was on the ground in Vietnam during the war. So he's reflecting in this passage on a contrast that he saw between the generals who conducted the wars, the Pacific and European theater wars of World War II for the Americans, and those who led the Vietnam War. Eisenhower and Patton and their United States Army of 1943, which Chief of Staff General George Marshall had referred to as, quote, a third-rate power, had been small men in a world of big men. Their personal survival, the survival of their army, and the survival of their nation had been at stake, and they had been afraid that they might lose. So that's Neil Sheehan's quote from A Bright Shining Lie, speaking about the American generals in World War II. He goes on then to speak about the most of the higher-ranking military leaders who were available for the Vietnam War had been junior officers during World War II. Not all of them, but many of them had been junior officers. And again, to quote Sheehan, some of them had, this is a quote now, had become so accustomed to winning from the later years of that war, meaning World War II, that they could no longer imagine they could lose. They assumed they would prevail in Vietnam simply because of who they were. So what happened then on the ground in Vietnam, as things began to go not so well, the leadership on the ground was reluctant to tell their leaders, who were reluctant to tell their leaders, who were reluctant to tell the politicians in Washington, D.C., what was actually happening. In other words, there was a reluctance to pass bad news up the chain of command. That happened, in Vietnam. It happened with American forces in Afghanistan, and slight move away from what we're speaking about, but it's also happening in Russia right now, as I record this, with the reluctance of his closest advisors and those troops on the ground to give bad news to Vladimir Putin. So things weren't going well, and the news back in Washington wasn't necessarily accurate. Now that would change, and then what to do with the bad news would become the next step in what we now call the Vietnam War. All right, so again, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you the next time.